makes it so you can't make it to one of the sessions, you can watch the recorded version. Also, I just want to give a little content warning. We do show some road crash scenes, nothing overly graphic, but we're trying to just learn how to prevent these and lessen the severity of them. So sometimes looking into and understanding what's happened is important. So if that's something that could disturb you, I just want to flag that now. And if anything comes up in the content, I'll give a little pre-warning as well. Kathy, tell us who you are and what are you doing here?
It's a good question, Ken. Something I ask myself on a daily basis. My name's Kathy DeCouris, and I'm the training manager at Safe System Solutions. And I have a background in teaching and training. So I'm a teacher by trade, but I've spent a long time in the road related technical training. So previous to Safe Systems, I was at ARB Group, the Australian Road Research Board, and looked after the technical training there as well. So I am your go-to person behind the scenes. I'll moderate the sessions. You can get in touch with me if you have any concerns, any questions, if you need an extension maybe for an assignment, if you can't make a session, if your tech fails, all those sorts of things, I'm here for you. So during the session, please ask questions using the Q&A or the chat function. So the Q&A, you can ask a question anonymously if you'd like to say something controversial or something exciting like that, or you can just use the chat. When you're using the chat, it's handy to make sure you've got the three dots to go the chat to everyone, if that makes sense. So other people in the course can also see your comments or questions. And if you do want to speak to us verbally, you can do so by raising your hand, and that's in the little bit down the bottom. But you can also use the reaction emojis if you particularly like or dislike something. And we can unmute you and you can ask a question or make a comment that way.
Yeah, thanks. And we do like that sort of chat going on behind the scenes a little bit because there's lots of advantages to doing this online, but the disadvantage is we don't get that lunchtime chat and meeting people and the like. So a bit of chat behind the scene can be helpful there, and also the sort of introductions using a learning management system and those sort of things, which I'll talk to you shortly about. But yeah, do get in contact with Kathy if you've got any issues with the course, or you're struggling with assignments or these sorts of things. And she'll be sure to help you out. Learning management system, Kathy, you want to explain that?
Yeah, great. So we're using, it's a Moodle-based system. So if you've been to university, maybe in the last 10 years or so, you'd be quite familiar with it. It's basically where we house everything to do with the course. So a copy of the presentation slides is in there. Any resources, any additional things that we give to you are in there. The recording of these webinars will go into each module at the end of the session, and that's also where there'll be a short quiz at the end of each live session. There'll be like a 10-question multiple choice quiz for you to do, just to reinforce the learning that's happened throughout the course. And that's also where your assignments will be. So the key points is you do need access to the learning management system. If you haven't jumped in there already, you have received an email with your login details. If you can't find it, it could be in your junk. If you can't scroll through the junk, just get in touch with me and I'll reset you up in there. So it's something you do need access to, and it's your go-to place for everything related to the course.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, make sure you have access. Well, you won't pass if you don't. Okay, and my name's Ken Beer. For those I don't know, I'm the principal engineer at Safe System Solutions. Before that, I was with the Victorian government, Vic Roads, for quite a long time in a variety of technical roles in road safety and development and technical standards and the like. So I'll be presenting the bulk of the content. I've got my colleague, Max McCardle, who's our project development lead and active transport infrastructure specialist. He'll be taking the third module, taking you through that. And my contact details are there. Reach out if you've got any questions around the technical content, and as we get into sort of doing assessments, if there are specifics around how you would score things or the like, we can get to that. Little QR code down here to my LinkedIn profile if you want to connect with me there. I'm try to share new industry insights in road safety engineering and auditing and safe system assessing and the like, to try and keep industry up to date on different bits and pieces. So always liking to link with people to continue the conversation on after the course. Now, Kathy, why is there a wombat?
We love wombats and we're from Australia. Wally the wombat, there he is there as our warning sign. He or she, or probably he, will appear a few times, and it can be a few times, can be lots of times throughout each module. And the idea is that it's hard to stay engaged with online learning and this sort of thing, even though we are very engaging. It can be tempting to, you know, an email notification pops up, or Ken thinks people are doing roundabout designs on the side. So you do have to count the number of Wallies, and then one of your quiz questions at the end of the session is to tell us how many Wallies appeared. There is a little bit of a buffer there in case you may have missed one, or sometimes Ken likes to go back and then go forward again, and then you think there was bonus Wallies. But yes, you do need to look for Wally and count the number of Wallies. This one is not included.
No, that's right. This one not included, but that's what they look like. They could be smaller, they could be a little bit hidden. Keep your eyes peeled. We're pulling out all the tricks to try and keep you engaged in the content here. Another trick we're going to use is to give you prizes. Simple incentivizing. And we give prizes out if you answer my questions. I'll ask lots of questions. You type them into the chat. First one to answer correctly, or an answer that we really like, or if you ask great questions, you're a chance of winning a prize. We've got, you know, points where we have case studies. If you volunteer, so you raise your hand and we let you unmute yourself, and you get a prize for that. And to incentivize you to get in a little bit early and make sure you're here for the start, Kathy runs super decorous trivia before each session. It could be road safety trivia, it could be general knowledge trivia, but just questions and answers. And so they're a bit of fun. Now, you don't get marked on anything that happens live in the session. So you're free to just have guesses and jot things down. But we do have some competency requirements for this course. So we set a benchmark, and well, the first one is just attending. And we want you at 4 of the 5 live webinars. So that's a pretty easy one usually. And view one if you have to miss one. We'd love you at 5 of the 5 so you can interact, ask questions, get involved. We have a series of tasks that we require you to complete, quizzes, assignments, and the like. And the benchmark there is 80%. So there's some different things that get marked. Some of them are sort of multiple choice quizzes, checking that you solidified the content for the module. And some of them are actual assignments where myself or one of our other very experienced safe system assessors will go through and mark your assignment and give you feedback. And we need you to get that 80%. Now, that sounds high, but don't stress out because, well, you've got 3 attempts. Everything is going to be covered in the module, so we should give you some pretty good guidance. And we offer one-on-one coaching. So if you are really struggling with it, or you do that, have your first attempt and you don't go so well, we can organize a catch-up and offer you lots of assistance and try and build up your competency so you get to that 80% pass mark. If we can't get you up to that, we feel we've failed as well. So we're in it together. Before we jump into it, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many different lands, I suppose, on which this course is being run. I'm in the Wurundjeri people land, and pay my respects to all the elders past, present, emerging. And yeah, quite excited to get into this course. Kathy, anything before we start jumping into it?
I think that's fantastic, Ken. We've got no questions. So if you do have a question, do type it in as you think of it. So don't wait for the pause in the course to type your question, because it takes a while to type. So type it in as you go. And I guess it'd be good to know, Ken, where are people from? So maybe if you can type into the chat now, we've got your name most of the time, and just where you're from, because we do have people coming from all over Australia for this particular course. So it'd be good to know. Gold Coast, sunny Gold Coast. Oh.
Oh, yeah. Oh, very nice. Oh,
excellent.
beautifully done. A nice way to get people typing, Kathy.
Sorry, and your prizes will come to you in the post, old school Australia Post style, at the end of the program. So unfortunately, I haven't quite yet worked out how to make magically prizes appear at your desk as soon as you win one. But that's
3D printing, Kathy, get on it.
Oh, okay, right.
They've just got to have a 3D printer.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yes, when you successfully complete the course, you'll get the electronic copy of your certificate immediately. And then a little bit down the track, depending on how Australia Post goes, you'll get a hard copy of the certificate, a little pack of any prizes you've won along the way. And Kathy is in the prize pit there, and it's always exciting for the randomness of prizes Kathy has collected and got out there. What do we got there, Kathy? I can't even see what that is. Is that an onion?
It's a shallot.
No, we're not giving out shallots again. There was that incident. No.
All right, let's go.
Stuff. All sorts of. I've got to get into this, but I actually wanted to contextualize safe system assessments, because there's a lot of independent assessments within transport infrastructure projects across a variety of things. And then when we sort of concentrate that down on safety and the safety of the traveling public or workers or anybody, we've got a series of independent assessments within infrastructure transport style projects. And really, a road safety audit is one that's been around for about 30 years. It's very well known around the world. People, have some understanding of what it is generally. And, that's been around a while. Just the general design review process, okay? That sort of, a designer designs up an upgrade to a road or a new bit of road or a new roundabout or whatever it is, hands it over to a colleague to check, to do logic checks, to check, have they calculated things right, use appropriate standards and the like. And there's a bit of overlap between road safety audit and design review, but there's lots of stuff outside the design review that an audit would be looking at and thinking about. And there's lots of design review stuff that really doesn't fit within that road safety audit. So the safe system assessment, which is going to be what we're focusing on in this course, it sort of overlaps a lot of what road safety audits do, a bit of design review style thinking, and then other stuff outside of all this, which is sometimes different ways to present things and provide that information across to your clients. Then there's this thing called safety and design, and that's slightly different beast. I mean, that's thinking about, can whatever it is you're planning be constructed safely, be maintained safely, be operated safely, be decommissioned safely. There's a lot of workplace health and safety thinking integrated into safety and design. Then there's what I've put here as DDA audits or Disability Discrimination Act audits, or that check that everybody with all abilities can use the facilities that are going to be built. And you can see there's some sort of overlap there. So there are these lots of these different things, and they do have overlaps. Safe system assessments and road safety audits are getting closer and closer together over time. Austroads is sort of moving things along. So we do see some overlap there, absolutely. But we're going to focus in on that safe system assessment, which is really quite exciting, much newer than road safety auditing, and provides some real advantages. This first module, though, what I want to do is really, I suppose, go back to some of the principles of the SAFE system, the key elements, pillars, the principles, and have a look into those kinetic energy thresholds. Have a look at the difference between traditional approaches to road safety and the SAFE system approach. We'll have a look at some best practice in things probably a little bit outside what we usually do as mainly infrastructure-focused people. We'll look at behavioural change initiatives, vehicle safety interventions, how they link with infrastructure projects, but also have some basic understanding of what is best practice in these spaces. And then we'll talk about speed, and we'll talk about why that's so critical to the SAFE system approach. Now, there's one of your Wallies, and that's me being nice, very easy. Wally count is one, but just keep an eye out as we go. No more help from me there. Now, some of you probably got sort of groaning at the thought of being told what the SAFE system is again, and because so many, you'll be thinking to yourself, oh, I've had this so many times. I'll probably put a little bit of a different lens on it in some areas. I'll be sort of directing it back to how we will do assessments of things based on these principles and elements and those sorts of things. So, I encourage you to ask questions, to challenge things, and we'll have a good discussion about it. So the SAFE system is something that's, I suppose, been around a while. The commitments in the SAFE system, the commitments to the, I suppose, adoption and implementation of this idea of the SAFE system is so well entrenched and documented now in national strategies, state action plans. And within those, there's starting to be some pretty significant commitments around SAFE system assessments. And we've seen the recent New South Wales Road Safety Action Plan with some serious commitments associated with SAFE system assessments for infrastructure projects, mandating it. We've seen the national strategy sort of, I suppose, not as clearly mandating, but saying SAFE system assessments are a good way of us looking at infrastructure and understanding its alignment with SAFE system principles, and lots of other jurisdictions really getting into it. In fact, added this slide recently into this to try to sort of summarize where we are at with SAFE system assessment at a jurisdictional level across Australia and New Zealand. And New Zealand's got a lot going on there in the SAFE system assessment space. Victoria and South Australia pretty early runners there. It's a mandated SAFE system assessments for infrastructure projects over some certain dollar values of total investment. We've got Queensland with it entrenched into its road safety policy for TMR that these have to be done, and bits and pieces going on in Northern Territory and Tassie and ACT. So it's really quite exciting, and it's, I suppose, testament to the fact that SAFE system assessments are proving to be valuable in helping us progress projects to have better alignment with this idea of the SAFE system. So, Kathy, I might start the prizes giving out. So, a while back, the SAFE system came in as an idea, and the federal government, Australian federal government, committed to this idea of the SAFE system as the way we would approach the death and serious injury on our road network. And they made that commitment in a year, and I'll give a prize for the first person who can guess the year. Remember, you don't lose any points or any marks or anything if you get it wrong. So just have a guess of some years. There we go. We're starting to see some guesses coming in.
We've got somewhere between 2000 and 2020.
Okay.
That's good. So when did the Australian government adopt the SAFE system? Is that right?
Yes, formally adopted.
Formally adopted it.
Okay.
Not quite there yet. It's getting, I think I'm going to give it to Simon. Closest was 2005.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, that is close. So 2004 was really the year we think of as the formal adoption from the federal government of the SAFE system approach as how we will address this trauma. And so that's a while back, isn't it? It's taken us a while to get, a good bit of traction with this and find some ways to actually assess things on that. But back in the day, this was the diagram that we were using. So I was in the State Road Authority in Victoria and doing some federal stuff, or working with the feds on, these ideas. And this diagram was sort of being produced. And back then, so right in the middle of that, don't worry if you can't read, it's a bit small there. It says human tolerance to physical force, okay? So that's the starting point. Like, how much force can humans handle? And then within that, and I'll expand on that significantly as we go, then there were these three elements, which were, okay, well, what are the vehicles out there? What are the roads and roadsides? And then what are the speed of travel? And that was it, right? That was the safe system. Okay, that was where it was all ticking along. And then there was this sort of debate, and somebody said, well, I think we're missing a vital element here. Well, what about the people, the road users, the people who are making decisions out there, people who are driving and walking and riding? And that then just split the people into these sort of two camps, where you had one group saying that, we can't have a safe system unless the people are acting appropriately and, doing correct things and alert and compliant. And then we had the other camp saying, well, these are humans. I mean, they're going to stuff up. People make mistakes all the time. I've made many mistakes already this morning, and I'll make many more today. I mean, they're minor, but that's part of being human. We have to create a system that is impenetrable to these normal human mistakes, that caters for them, that understands them, that manages them. And that means that they're not going to result in death or serious injury. And so there was this debate, and, people clashing heads, and human factors, people jumping up and down, and behavioral psychologists, saying, and then others, and what ended up happening was this square got put around it with this little thing that said, alert and compliant road users. Now, I was a bit more in the camp of saying, nah, that's not the safe system. Like that, as soon as you require a road user to be alert and compliant the whole time, we're not going to have a system that is made for humans. Anyway, so then there was lots of, debating. Anyway, that's what ended up getting sort of passed through. And then it lasted for a while until people sort of, saw that people were using that as a bit of a, get out of jail clause. Not it's a bad term to use in this context, but you know what I mean? Like, not my fault. I had nothing, I can't do anything more. They've got to stop falling asleep, or they've got to stop at the red lights, and these sorts of things, where we now understand that we've got to think beyond that. And so then the emergence of a whole lot of different safe system diagrams, and you might see ones you're familiar with there, lots of different ones out there. People love the circle. I go with the circle on that. I'm just going to talk to this one briefly and use it throughout this course, just because of its simplicity, really. But I think there's good elements in lots of them, and I don't get too caught up in all of that. The reason I'm going to use this one for its simplicity, I mean, what we've got there at the center, we've got people. And at the center there, we're saying that humans, are what we are trying to protect. And we aspire to nobody being killed or seriously injured on the road network. It's an aspiration. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen in the next 10 years, but we should be thinking and getting our mindset in that it's unacceptable to have death and serious injury on the road network. Within here, we've got this really, really important thing here that says people are going to make mistakes. We need to start putting that as a critical part of our thinking in the design, the operation, the management of the road network. Mistake making. Okay. And then we go up here and we say human bodies are vulnerable, but that's the biomechanics of injury. Okay. That's how much force can the human body handle before we are killed or seriously injured in different crash types, and really get an understanding of that. And with the emergence of the SAFE system, that is a key design parameter. Okay. The same way you think of your lux levels for your lighting or your 1 in 100-year flood drainage capacity levels or the like, you think about human tolerance to physical force. When the crash happens, what is the kinetic energy that will be involved, and does that meet our design parameters for force? Okay, that's a big, massive mindset change in the design, operation, and management of our road network. And people still, like, you know, as much as they understand this force stuff, thinking about it as a design parameter isn't really where they've got their headspace yet. We're going to keep pushing in a variety of ways, and safe system assessments help this. And the shared responsibility is where it's gone. Shared responsibility is put in there to say that regardless of what happens on the road network, we as system designers, and I call all of us here system designers, in one way or another, we influence the system in one way or another, we have to take responsibility. The system failed. Okay, the road user might have done something we felt was inappropriate, or they were not alert, not compliant, whatever it was. Okay, our system didn't kick in to stop that, resulting in death or serious injury. And the way the system can kick in is through vehicle safety interventions, either stopping crashes or lessening the severity of those crashes. Roads and roadsides, same thing, stopping crashes happening in the first place or lessening the severity of them. The road users can play a role. We understand the limitations of this one with the fact that people make mistakes. And the speeds, the speed of travel, not necessarily speed limits, but just the speed of travel. We'll talk about that shortly. Now, in this course, we do give you a little stretch break at about half time of the 2 hours. So you'll be able to fill up your coffee there. So I'm pretty sure most of you will at least be able to sort of recite these key principles. The safe system assessment process is sort of a nice way to use a risk assessment methodology with this particular lens of these principles and look at road infrastructure. So I want to jump out of roads and transport for a second to just have a look at safety culture in a different lens. And I'll take you to the manufacturing of widgets in factories, some sort of widgety thing that's being produced. And back in the day, in these areas, it was a very open system. They let people come in and work with a very small amount of instruction or training, and they had a lot of death and serious injury, and arms ripped off, and kids crushed, and workers killed, and the like. And what would happen is that they would tell people these are dangerous. This is a dangerous area. This is a dangerous job. This is very dangerous. You need to ensure your safety. That's what we sort of call a pathological safety culture, where you push the responsibility for safety to the individual. You tell them it's dangerous. You give them some training and some information. You know the system's dangerous, and you tell them to protect themselves. Then you elevate your safety culture up. Okay. And this is where we get into what we call a reactive one. And the machines that are really ripping off all the arms and crushing the people and the like, somebody looks at them and says, okay, we've got to do something about this. This is the third person that's been killed in this machine over the last few years. We've got to do something here. And the guards put on it, or some changes are made. Then it elevates up again to what we call a calculating safety culture. And this is where the economists get involved, really, and they sort of come in and say, well, you know, if you put guards on all of these machines, yeah, that will save X amount of lives, and you will get then this much more widget production because you won't have lost time for the machines being down. You won't have to pay out money to the families of the breadwinner that's been killed. And, you know, we've had a look at all your factories, and if you spend £30,000, was pounds back in these days, £30,000, you'll get £90,000 of return in widget production over the next 5 years. It's a good investment. We've come up with this thing called a benefit cost ratio, and a benefit cost ratio of 3. And, so then you invest in that because it makes economic sense. Then we elevate up to where we talk about a safe system. And that's where we set this very, very high bar for safety. And we produce widgets up to that, within that envelope of safety. But safety is setting the precondition for widget production. You're not balancing it out, right? Saying, no, if we can't get this safety, we stop that activity until we can get that safety level. And then you have to invest heavily in maintaining that. And it's not just maintaining the equipment and those sorts of things, but it's maintaining the culture as well. So when we look at the road network, it's a really interesting sort of parallel. And I'm sure you've done that in your mind already now. But where do we sit? Well, we've certainly got heavy elements of pathological safety. So we know it's unsafe. We know that, we give people licenses and we say it's very dangerous out there. You need to protect yourself. All right. And we push a huge amount of responsibility back on them. We've had a culture of reactive road safety, of black spot programs and the like, and they've done a great job. We've done calculating, we get BCRs, we understand investment, and we refine that to within an inch of its life, and then try to be so optimizing in economics of road safety investment. We do see proactive bits and pieces, and that's where we want to be moving ourselves towards. Proactive, we've been proactive in things like, I suppose school speed zones were a nice early proactive measure, in the sense that if you step it back a level to calculating, school speed zones are not a good economic investment. And it's just a simple economic calculation to say, well, okay, if we reduce all of these roads during school times to in speed limit, how much is that going to impact on the economy? And the traditional way of calculating that is simply work out how many vehicles are going through there, what's the change in travel time, and it'll be like, 1.5 seconds per vehicle, and then you calculate all the vehicles and all the time, and you add all of that up and you multiply it by about $88 an hour or something, which is the average economic productivity of an Australian, or what, and then you get this massive sum of money of impact to the economy. I mean, it's kind of meaningless, but that's what economists do to a degree. And then you say, well, how many kids are we going to save? And so how many kids are, predicted to be killed, and how many less will be killed with that? And you work that out, and then you put a dollar figure to a kid's life, and you say, okay, how many kids? And then you divide the two and you go, that's a bad investment. Like, there are just not enough kids killed. And there won't be enough kids killed to make that a worthwhile investment. And we sort of go, that is grotesque. Like that, why? Like, no, we're talking about kids' lives here. And so we accept as a society, we will slow down. So we can get ourselves in that space. Kids, amazing little hook. People are willing to do proactive safety culture around protection of kids. When we get to other areas of community and society and things, they're often a lot more reluctant. Kathy, I'll take any questions. And I also think we've got a little quiz just to get people interactive. And remember, you're not being marked on it. It's just something to, see if people have been listening and reinforce a bit of that thinking. Any questions for me?
Absolutely, there is. So there's a question about human bodies are vulnerable, and Bass Coast has a quite high elderly population. Vulnerability is not a one size fits all. Is this considered?
So yes and no. I mean, we use some pretty generic whole of society crash curves, and I will show those in detail. However, in a safe system assessment, you have the flexibility to attribute a severity score to what you think the incidents will be. So if you are doing an assessment in an area where you know that there is a higher proportion of vulnerable road users with higher vulnerability, like older pedestrians, you can actually account for that and put that forward in your assessment. So that's one of many advantages of a safe system assessment. I mean, you would do that also in a road safety audit. Hopefully, you would be factoring that in and considering it, but it's just so discreetly required in a safe system assessment, at least do that thinking.
Good. I'm going to launch that poll. So what should have happened now is there's a little pop-up box that's appeared on your screen, and there's 2 questions on there. So the first one, and as Ken mentioned, you're not being marked. Which of the following is not a key principle of the safe system? So which of the following options there is not a key principle? Don't get caught up by that one. And so you just fill it in. And the next one is, at what speed did Usain Bolt cross the finish line in his world record 100-meter sprint? This is interesting. I'd like to see where we're going here, Ken. So if you just complete that poll. Now, I've got another. So traffic signals, tell us, Ken. Philip thinks they're in the pathological category. What do you think?
I think there is a lot of merit to that statement in context, in specific contexts. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to talk a fair bit about that next module, I think, because as Phil's sort of hit the nail on the head of, that's a very, in certain contexts, a very clear example of safe system or not safe system thinking just playing out. So I'll leave that as a little window into module 2, a little incentivizer.
Okay, I think that might be Phil giving you a thumbs up there, or somebody else, doesn't matter. All right, so we've almost got everybody having completed the poll. So I'm going to give it 3 more seconds, and then, oh, that's amazing. Everybody's, and you can just take a guess for the second one about what speed, although I think people have done some back of the envelope calculations there. So I'm going to end that one and share the results. So you should be able to see which of the following is not a key principle of the safe system is to aim for no mistakes on the road.
I mean, in some utopian world, that would be lovely, but we're realistic here. We're dealing with humans. We're going to try and minimize mistakes on the road and then manage. Minimize and manage. That's the way to think about it. There has been in the past that culture of trying to eliminate mistakes on the road. We're not going to ignore trying to minimize them and get rid of as many as we can. But gee, if you just stop your game at that, yeah, we're not going to do well. Back of the envelope calculations on that's a little bit tricky, Kathy, because you have to factor in acceleration. and time. It's because it's crossing the finish line speed, not average speed across the 100 meters. So
yeah, but these people, clever people, Ken. What do you think? Was it 44 kilometers? That's what
it was 44 kilometers, and I have used that a lot in a lot of different courses, and a lot of other people use it as well. So I dare say a few people have started to get that in their mind. So that's Usain Bolt kicking along at 44 kilometers an hour. Why on earth are we asking that question in a course? Well, because the analogy is then we park a car at the end of his lane and he goes bang into that at 44 kilometers an hour. And is he going to survive? Well, he is like the Hulk of a human, isn't he? He's built to withstand some force. So he will likely survive that. Most likely he will survive that. Pick any of us up and fling us at a car at 44 kilometers an hour. We are not so likely to survive. There's a nice little test you can do, which is to run at your full speed at a tree or a wall and smash into it just to check that you will survive that, because the human body kind of evolved to withstand the physical force of your maximum running speed. And there's a nice general correlation. It's general between people's running speed, maximum running speed, and the force that they can handle. So old frail people down Basque Coast there, they can't run as fast. They can't run down the main street of cows very fast, nor can they withstand the force. Yeah, so that becomes an interesting sort of way to think about a design parameter. But let's delve into that a little bit more. Okay, so we've got here the S-curve. Now, there's lots of work going on around the world in people recreating these and adding bits and doing it with slightly more modern vehicles and adding different injury levels into these curves. But we still, most people still tend to use some fairly basic curves, which talk about fatality probability, the chance that some member of our community will be killed when struck at a certain speed. And this is where a passenger vehicle hits a pedestrian, okay? And what we can see there is that, around 10, 20, 30 kilometers per hour, we generally feel that most people will survive, okay? It's an interesting point around that 30 kilometers per hour because it gets really bad really quickly after that. It sort of really kicks up after that. The great man, he comes in up a bit higher, but remember, this curve is for all of society, frail people, old people, young people, and others. And there's going to be freak circumstances where people get hit at high speeds and survive, and there'll be people get struck very low speeds in a car park or something, fall, hit their head, they're killed. So it's a general curve. So that's for passenger vehicle pedestrian crashes. Don't think about this as speed limit either. Think about this as collision speed. This is just physics, biomechanics of injury. There we go. That's what we're designed for. It's all right. He survives. He breaks a couple of ribs, comes back the next year, wins the gold medal. We're designed to withstand forces off our own legs. When we go faster than that, or things propel at us faster than that, we get into dangerous territories. We have this information then for crash types, other crash types. So this is a right angle crash where we've got the bullet vehicle. The bullet vehicle is the one that we consider to do the damage, to do the killing and seriously injuring in any crash type. So the bullet vehicle speed, that's the sort of collision speed we're talking about. This one here is the target vehicle. So the target vehicle is the one that's going to have the death in this case. And we see there that point of sort of exponential kick up sort of happens around the 50 kilometers per hour. 50 kilometers per hour speed coming in there, and the bullet vehicle striking at that speed. And then if we look at head-on crashes, this is where we see around that 70 kilometers per hour bullet vehicle speed. Now, they're both bullet vehicles, both target vehicles in these particular sort of crashes. Sometimes it's sort of frontal offset and the like, but generally around that 70 kilometers per hour. And that's actually 70 kilometers per hour for each vehicle. So you think about that as a closing speed of 140 kilometers an hour, but in terms of crash forces, it's a 70 kilometer per hour crash, because assuming we've got same mass of vehicle going at same speed and they strike each other, and they basically would go from 70 kilometers per hour, if you're thinking about the individual occupants of the vehicle, 70 to 0. And that's the crash force. That's the biomechanics we're interested in, is what force is being imparted on that particular vehicle occupant. It has a great Mythbusters episode, and I'm always up for people watching Mythbusters on work time. So, Kathy, I reckon we should share that in the learning management system, because they just do what Mythbusters does and crash cars into each other at these speeds and then into brick walls with accelerometers, just to prove exactly that point I just made, which is the force is, you're not taking the force of the other vehicle in this crash, if that makes sense. It's the same as hitting a brick wall at that speed. We also, throughout the course, and you get the PDFs of all the slides out of the learning management system, we often have a little link there if you're interested in a little bit more info on some of these topics, to a little safe system snippet where you can get some more intel and info on this. We've sort of expanded a little bit on quite a few of these little concepts that we're putting forward. Okay, so this is starting to give us some parameters, some ways to think about forces, some ways for us to make decisions in designs or management or operation of our roads and streets. And based on that new design parameter that we really need to start considering, which is biomechanics of injury. Now, we tend to take that 10% line there for a number of reasons. It's that point of things going really bad really quickly after it. I suppose it's an acknowledgement to a degree that we do have lots of other elements of the system that are, working to try to reduce the chance and the severity of injury. And so we're getting advancement in vehicle features and the like. But it's probably also an acknowledgement that we are so far from operating the road network within these new design parameters that we're sort of starting to scale our way back to these. Now, people might say, oh, this is just your window into speed limit reductions, isn't it? I'll say, no, it's not. That might be one way we start to, in some circumstances, bring this back to something that is more survivable. But there's many ways for us to get to these sorts of design speeds through infrastructure changes and the like. Or we can just eliminate the ability for these crash types to actually happen. I mean, you can travel well faster than 70 kilometers an hour if you've got a barrier separating the two vehicles so they can't have this head-on crash. So when we get into the details of safe system assessing, which we will progressively seed bits of safe system assessing in as we build up this sort of level of knowledge over the first 3 modules, and then we really get into just the where do you put numbers and how do you write bits and pieces. One of the key things will be for you to be scoring severity predictions. And this is where we're saying, okay, well, what speed is this crash happening at? And what are the specifics of this crash type? And you can see here lots of different crash types, and you've got your speeds, and then you've got this sort of colored gradient here, which indicates that, there's some, varied, but we know really if we're having a car running off the road and hitting a tree at 80 or 100 kilometers per hour, it's going to be very, very bad. Okay. The next thing I want to just say is that this diagram is the bane of my existence in my 20 years of road safety. It's not because it's incorrect. It's the way it's used. Let me explain this. This comes from one of many crash causation studies around the world, and they always try to outdo each other. It's like every time a new crash causation study comes out, it's like the world's biggest crash causation study, 3,000 crashes, in-depth root cause analysis. You got to be impressed with the researchers and the depth that they go to. And what they keep producing, this one just happens to be one from 2003, which a lot of people use. It was for drivers particularly. You could say this could be road users, because some of the other studies went beyond just drivers, but this one happened to be road users. And they come back with, and it's always somewhere between 90 and 95, or some of them went to a little less, 85 to 95% of crash causation is the road user. Then you have a small part which the road has played a role in the cause of that crash. Sometimes it overlaps, the human infrastructure interface. And sometimes the vehicle has played a role, the vehicle being the smallest, and vehicle malfunction or specifics of that. And then you've got all these little bits of overlap. Right? Now, I don't disagree with any of what they've come out with. But what happens with that is people find this great research. Their immediate reaction is to say, oh, we now know what the biggest cause of crashes and death and serious injury are. That's what we need to fix. We need to change. And that is the hardest thing for us to change, right? If we were willing to really get properly stuck into genetic engineering and modifying humans and those sorts of things, we might be able to get some bigger gains, but we're not up for that. And well, at the moment, we don't seem to be, which is fine. I'm not up for that. But the thing is that what we need to do is reshape our thinking about this. Just because that is the biggest cause of crashes does not mean that that's going to necessarily be hugely beneficial in terms of reducing the amount of death and serious injury on the road network. And we need to alter that thinking to say, okay, this is a system failure, a system where humans are involved, so mistakes are going to happen. And we need to alter the system. Now, Ostrode's put this one out, this diagram, and I'm still not quite happy with it, but because I would say that these should be inside. Driver excess, driver inexperience, well, they're system failures. How did a driver with so little experience and understanding of basic operation of a road network be able to get into our system and be operating in our system? How has a vehicle or a driver been able to go excessive speeds? Surely vehicles should have intervened at some point there. Anyway, so we think about it as a system failure, and thus we can use our different levers within this system to stop it resulting in death or serious injury. It may mean stopping the crash, but it may mean the crash still occurs. We just have managed the energy in that crash. The other thing associated with that is that people think of road crashes often, and gee, the media do not help us here. They think about road crashes often in this space, which is deliberate violations. So somebody deliberately going 150, through in arterial roads, or driving high speed down the wrong carriageway on the motorway, or, these sorts of major deliberate violations. That's what they think road trauma is, right? But we have slips, lapses, mistakes, and unintentional violations as human errors by generally people trying to go safely about their own business, generally, normal human mistakes. And they actually represent somewhere in the sort of 70+% of death and serious injury on our road network. Okay, so deliberate violation and these ones that have been categorized in that sense, that's a significant portion of our death and serious injury. It's not the major portion. To a degree, this one is really challenging. Often takes a completely different way to look at how we should be addressing this. I was involved in a big Austroads study around repeat and recidivist offenders and deliberate violators and these sorts of things. And it's kind of amazing to see people drive the way they live is a kind of good takeaway out of that. And so it's a bigger societal challenge. It's got very very sort of wicked in societal, socioeconomic impacts. It's really fascinating, and we really need some major changes there. But 70+% of the death and serious injury, we've got people generally trying to do the right thing, yet our system is failing them. Okay, I think it's time, Kathy, to do a little exercise. Well, let's mix this up with our stretch break. So we'll give people a little extra time on this so you can have a go at this, and it'll come up on your screen shortly. I'll explain what you're going to do. So you can have a quick go at it, but I'll give you sort of 5 minutes, and then you can have a stretch, fill your coffee or water up or whatever you want, and we'll get back into it after that. But what this is just a way for us to sort of consolidate some of the thinking we're doing there from traditionally how we've approached road safety for many, many decades, and how we're now trying to move with this safe system approach and this alteration of thinking, and it'll just mix and match. So when it pops up on your screen, you'll just be able to say, okay, victim blaming is sort of how we've been going about things. Nobody will label it victim blaming, but what it is, we say, well, you shouldn't have fallen asleep. They shouldn't have fallen asleep. Yeah, that is kind of victim blaming. What do we think about that now? How do we think about that? So I might launch the poll then. Oh no, there it goes. So hopefully that's popped up on your screen. We do have, if it hasn't popped up on your screen because the firewall's somehow blocking it or the like, don't get too concerned. You could do it by typing in, 1B, 2A, whatever, into the chat if you wanted. But I'm giving you now 4.5 minutes.
Geez, Ken. All right, so quick break plus some work sounds exactly how Ken likes to operate. But Ken, before you do go away, earlier question about when you were talking about Mythbusters and the head-on collision, is that both vehicles traveling at 100 k's an hour?
Well, yeah. So, if we're thinking about 100 km/h crash forces, yes, both vehicles traveling at 100 km an hour.
Anthony's made a comment about wide centerline treatments on 80 km or higher roads are an example of a safe system treatment or principles. So that's what we call a supporting treatment, safe system supporting treatment. We'll get into categorizing those. I mean, that's going to significantly reduce the likelihood of crash. We've got some speed reduction. We haven't quite got into our tolerable levels, but there's some pretty good aspects to that. It's a good road safety treatment, but that's the kind of thing that we're able to analyze using the safe system assessment methodology and get some numbers around it. Well, how good is it? Excellent. All right. I think we will pause at that point. And so how many minutes do people have now? Maybe 3.
Yeah, we'll give them a little bit more because I talked and they might have been listening to that instead of answering. So a little bit more time. You've got as much time as it takes me to go and fill a coffee, which is going to be about 3 minutes. Okay, so I've got it there. I might, just having a look there, I might use the one on the screen. So let's get rid of that one. Don't get to, some of these probably could have gone to many. I'm just using one that Austrode's used. But we go sort of victim blaming. We're really recognizing human error, trying to minimize its consequence, understanding that shared responsibility. Emphasis on road user education and compliance. Well, not ignoring those, but just understanding their limitations and really trying to create that forgiving system. Crash reduction, okay? It's now sort of thinking about consequence, severe injury minimization. The idea of 4 pillars, action independently like silos. Well, no, we understand their interaction and there's this interacting system working together. And this idea to balance out mobility and safety versus maximizing safe mobility. Quite, wording specifics there, but it's that kind of idea that safety sets the precondition rather than finding that, a nice optimal amount of our community killed and seriously injured in road transport. That's not where we want to be. We want to say, no, they're unacceptable. Don't get too concerned if you had slightly different ones there. As I say, could have gone to a few. Just a way to keep everybody thinking about that. I like Ian Cameron, who is a Western Australian's comment that he made actually on a UN stage or platform. We need a paradigm shift in road safety policy to stop the road death epidemic, and we need it now. It's unrealistic to expect that education and enforcement alone will bring the needed step change. Even road users who know and follow the rules make mistakes. A safe system creates an environment which is simple, in which simple mistakes will no longer kill people or seriously injure people. All right, let's talk about a high-speed road here. And you don't know this road, or some of you might know this road, but you don't know it probably intimately. And this project was to put a center wire rope safety barrier down the middle of this road. Create a 2+1 scenario is what we'd call it. So 2 lanes in one direction and 1 lane in the other. And then you sort of just swap over which side of the road gets that extra lane for overtaking opportunities every few kilometers or so. 2+1. Now, this project was the sort of first of this narrow, flush, narrow median barrier system projects in Victoria under these sort of specifics. And it came up against an amazing amount of resistance from a huge number of areas. Okay. Now, without knowing a lot of the background or anything, I just want you to type into the chat what you think some of that resistance was. What were the topics that people were saying, well, we can't do that because this or that or the like. So I'm going to give out a few prizes. I've got a few that I'm going to note down, which weren't necessarily the biggest issues, but I think a couple of interesting ones. And if anybody gets the same as those, they can have a prize. So pop in some ideas.
Questions come through. Is it very low, this one? Or is it just the angle we're looking at?
Oh, sorry, this is just near the terminal. It's ramping up.
Yes.
Yeah, great question. Hang on. Here's another little section of it, so you can see it there.
That's better. I think a prize to you, Anita, for being very observant.
Yeah. She doesn't need a Barry to measure barrier height, to do it by eye.
All right, great responses coming in, Ken.
Okay, I was just writing down a couple. So before I looked at what anybody said, so I can give out some prizes. So, okay, here we go. Kathy, now get your prize spreadsheet ready to go here. Okay. So straight off the bat, we've got motorcycles and emergency services, which were two that I had written down, which has come up again. Phil's popped it in there as well. So some interesting ones have come in there. Cost, access. Yes, so property accesses and how to get in and out and not have, just constant breaks in very short lengths of barrier was another one. Prize for that as well. These are good. Damage to vehicles. Okay, deflection of the wire rope safety barrier. That's a really good one there. Prize for that. Melanie there, because that was a really fascinating one for me, and I'll talk to it again a bit more. So we've got shoulders not wide enough. Okay, posts not being able to be seen in fog, so it's an interesting one. Yeah, so we are putting something in the middle of the road there. Maintenance costs. So maintenance cost was one, but also, just the maintenance teams and crews just, really being really against this idea because of the challenges it sort of posed for them to do maintenance of the actual road as well, and being able to, divert people around them filling a pothole or the like was sort of stopped. And some other good ones there. This group's great. I mean, these are all things that were being faced. The interesting one, the deflection one, I got involved in at one point on this one was, so the thing was that, so if this vehicle hits this, the barrier is going to deflect. That's how a wire rope safety barrier works. The posts sort of get flattened and the wires engage the vehicle and it sort of deflects out. And we have some deflection requirements and it's all based off the testing of barriers and vehicles and angles and speeds and the like. And this doesn't quite meet it with a wire rope safety barrier. Back when this was going in, there wasn't actually an option for a flexible W-beam system. And it would deflect just a little bit into this lane. As a result of that, quite a segment of the technical people that were getting involved in this project said that the project, you can't do it. I mean, this lasted a year of sort of committees and the like, and the idea was that because we can't meet that specific standard, you can't put this in. Where it sat there with just a line and no barrier at all, which is far worse. But anyway, the point being that safe system assessments can be really helpful in these sorts of situations. And why is that? Well, if you get a road safety audit done of this job, the road safety audit and the auditor and audit team's job is simply to find things that present the risk of death and serious injury or other injury to road users. They're not there to tell you whether it's a good project or a bad project, or it's going to overall help things or impede things, they will pick up these things like, well, that doesn't quite meet deflection requirements. There's sightline deficiencies because of this. What about access? What about motorcyclists? What about these sort of things? These are all important things to think about, right? But what can happen when road safety audit reports are received and they have lots and lots of issues identified like this? It can look like a very high risk project from a road safety perspective. But the reality is that this project is doing so much to reduce death and serious injury. It's so significant, but just a road safety audit report does not recognize that. And that's not the purpose of the road safety audit report. I'm not saying a road safety audit report is bad. That's not its purpose. But a safe system assessment puts right up front, right in your face, how significant a reduction in death and serious injury we're expecting, or how much better we're doing in safety, and then progresses to sort of get into some of the details of things that might not be as optimal as we'd like or need to be thought through. And so that's a huge advantage of safe system assessments, is they actually foster innovation and us doing things that may not be traditional, right? But they show that very clearly in a safety report, in a Ostroad sort of sanctioned methodology, and we can put it out there and say, look, the safe system assessment says this. Because if you get a road safety audit, the road safety audit just says, this is risk, these are risks. Hope that makes sense. Some of you will probably be going, I can see this can be very advantageous in us actually progressing and changing things. Anyway, of course, that one got hit because it did. It got in. Lots of people arguing and the like, but eventually it got in, got hit. Of course, it got hit. And in amongst one of the hits, somebody called up the regional engineer, one of the people who was involved, and the regional engineer was expecting to get shouted at, I'm sure. It's what always happens when you're in the regions and somebody wants to call you about something that's happened. But on this occasion, actually, they just wanted to thank them for the installation of that. They'd been driving the road for many years, and that barrier hadn't been there, but this time it was, and somebody came directly at them. And luckily, that engineer put them onto the comms team. They got those people. They made a little video. That is in the learning management system. Some of you will have seen it before. I think it's a great little 2-minute sort of evidence of the safe system in action. Because somebody fell asleep, they left their lane. If the barrier wasn't there, it would have been a death or serious injury, most likely, probably a death. And there would have been back to that traditional blame culture saying, well, why did they drive when they were tired? And they shouldn't have done that. And like, but you know, the system just kicked in and changed it and managed the crash. Okay, thank you for the input on that one. And you know, just using it as one sort of example there. I want to briefly touch on safer road users, vehicles, speeds, at a very sort of surface level, but enough so you've got a little bit to in your toolkit to talk to. In a safe system assessment, we do and we can delve into some of these in a little bit more detail when we're looking at projects or areas or communities and the like, but it's not often, you know, a really heavy focus of a safe system assessment. We focus in on the roads and speeds as the dominant part. But let's look at safe road users and try and understand, well, what works and what doesn't. So to try to get people to perform better on the road network, we recognize human limitations, but we do understand education, encouragement, enforcement, and then some sort of like entry into the system. I've popped their graduated licensing systems or the like, but it's sort of entry in to being able to operate within this system. They all have some, you know, potential benefits, but education, we know, of course, the little humans are the best at taking on messages and the like. They can be nice little Trojan horses to their parents if you give good road safety messages, where everybody in the car must be wearing a seatbelt. They can enforce that within their car, or at least talk to that, so it can be a good thing. Young drivers, high risk, and we know that there's a few really important things. Just getting those hours of experience on the public road network is where you get benefit. Anything involving like high speed skids and high speed braking techniques, so like advanced driver training courses and those sort of things, they actually increase the amount of death and serious injury, because it's counterintuitive. But what happens is that the young drivers get these new sets of skills, and along with that comes an increased risk-taking, or increased confidence and risk-taking, and that swamps by a long shot any improvements that they actually have if they find themselves in those scenarios. So that's one of the most comprehensively studied things in road safety around the world. Just shows that it's a bad thing to do those courses. We know that talking to the community and individuals around their risk of being involved in a crash is ineffective. So educating people on, if you text and drive, you'll be involved in a crash, just do not believe you, and nor should they. Between us here, don't share this info with others. If somebody texts and drive, the risk of them being involved in a crash is absolutely minuscule. A death and serious injury crash, right? But that's not we as road safety professionals are trying to think about the community risk increase. And what you have to do is add up all those little increases in risk. And that gives us a big collective risk. But what often happens in road safety, in behavioral campaigns and education and the like, is we talk to an individual like they're a collective. And they just don't believe us. It happens with this. So this ad, and you've probably sort of pieced it together, is it's kind of brilliant in the sense that we're not saying to that driver, hey, or the driver, you text and drive, you'll be involved in a crash. So, hey, you text and drive, the kids are going to text and drive. Now that is something more tangible that they can work with, and they don't want to happen. Okay. Speed limits is another great example of this. You take a road, it's 100 kilometers an hour, and you try and reduce it to 80 kilometers an hour, and you tell the community, we're doing that for your safety. They will just, no, you are not. You're doing it for revenue raising or whatever their thing is. And they'll come out with all the, stock standard lines. I've been driving this road for 40 years and never had a problem. It's all the, tourists or all these people or whatever it is, right? And the thing is that their risk at 100 kilometers an hour compared to their risk at 80 kilometers an hour is an absolutely minuscule difference as an individual, right? But if you add up all of those differences in risk, it's pretty massive. Anyway, what works? Okay, like a whole school approach, getting road safety education throughout the curriculum, combining with other partner activities like police activities and those sort of things. So it's a holistic approach. Supporting community education, community initiatives. I mean, there are highly motivated people in the community to improve road safety. And I suppose our job is to ensure that they're doing evidence-based things. I mean, it's tragic to see, communities putting their hard-earned money and their time into initiatives that we know increases the community's chance of death or serious injury, like these advanced driver training courses and the like, or where they, take the kids to the emergency ward or the morgue or something and say that's what can happen if you don't drive appropriately. The research just shows it's not effective. The only people that affects are the absolute lowest risk drivers, and they get not only affected and scared to be in cars, they get, other issues as well. So some research and evidence is important in our space here. Graduated licensing, very effective in terms of implementing risk measures or risk mitigation measures and then releasing them over time. So, passenger restrictions, alcohol restrictions, phone restrictions and these sorts of things, and then easing them off as people get less risky. Targeting especially motivated groups, parents being very motivated to implement initiatives and systems to improve the safety of their kids driving. And I'll talk about action programs, I suppose, a little bit later on. I think I've covered off a few of these things that we know don't work. Or fear tactics doesn't tend to work in a behavioral change initiative or getting people to change their behavior. Like just scaring the hell out of the public about road safety doesn't appear to change driving behavior. It does set a pretty good platform for legislative change. So if you want to put in some new, enforcement rules or legislation or the like, a bit of fear tactics can work there, but you don't actually get change in people's driving behavior. Or again, the people that do change their behavior are not really who you need to change their behavior. Skill-based driver training we talked about already, that does not work. One-off events. Can't see anything in the simulator space yet. I think that needs to continue to be monitored. There's lots of advanced technologies coming out. I think they haven't seen a truly independent evaluation of simulator. There's some pretty dodgy ones that look like they've been paid for and influenced by the manufacturers and sellers of that. So just be aware of that. Go-karting racing clubs, just the same as skill-based driver training. They just increase risk. Risk-taking behaviours, information-only approaches. Again, and that sits a bit with fear tactics. I mean, you tell people how many people have been killed on a road. It doesn't change the way people drive that road. But it can give you a bit more leverage for some interventions. I think this is an interesting little chart. It shows the number of deaths and serious injuries at different sort of experience levels. And so learner drivers, these are Victorian data. As soon as they're into their Ps, it goes off the charts, it sort of goes down, and it sort of flattens out there. Now, this is raw numbers of deaths and serious injuries, but if you do it by crashes per vehicle kilometre travelled as well, this does come up a little bit, but it's still in your 0, 1, 2 years. It's less than your very experienced drivers. So that data alone just throws out the idea that our road safety problem is because people don't have high-level driving skills. Like when you hear it, people say, "Oh, if everybody just could drive like Michael Schumacher, that would fix our road safety problems." Would not, right? If everybody had those advanced skills, you'd probably see far more increase in death and serious injury. But this data just proves that.
Ken, sorry, just before you go on there's just been a couple of comments and questions come through. Do you know of any research on crashes in America where the driver age is 16, but the drinking age is 21?
No. I know some different driver age studies, and it's pretty bad. It's releasing driving age. You get significant benefits by holding off letting people. I don't know of any ones that interface with then that combination of drinking age, but I'm sure we can have a look at that in some research databases we've got access to.
Okay, I'll note that down. And there's an interesting comment that's come through from Phil that says the thing with behavioural change is that you have to do it to every generation that comes along. Whereas if you change the way the environment and vehicles are built, it lasts forever. And that just reminds me of the thing that they always say when, some 18 to 24-year-olds have a high-speed crash. It's like, when will those young people learn? And they probably learn when they get to middle age like me, but the next generation of young people just don't learn.
Absolutely. And it's such a great point there from Phil. I mean, the sustainability of any countermeasures or things that we do, behavioural change is so hard to maintain, and infrastructure is so sustainable in that sense. Anyway, let's keep moving on. Thank you, though. Great input and liking that. I think encouragement is a little bit in the behavioural space, which is hard. I think encouragement's a little bit of opportunity. I think there's a lot of good stuff that can be done in this space. Incentivizing campaigns and programs. I mean, I some of you have heard of Speed Lotto. I think as an incentivizing campaign for me, that's one of the best I've ever seen, which is where Sweden's done it. A few of the Nordic countries have done it. Point-to-point speed cameras, which take a photo of your number plate at point A and then maybe 10 kilometers down the road, point B. And if you go over the speed limit, you get a fine. We've got that a lot in Australia. Everybody except for New South Wales does it for all road users. New South Wales just does it for heavy vehicles for some reason. But your point-to-point is, in place. But the Speed Lotto idea is that, so you fine everybody that goes over the speed limit, but all of that money goes into the draw, and somebody who drives through there under the speed limit will win all that money. Because they're taking photos of everybody's number plate and through that. And just to me, that sort of is an incentivizing campaign that just beautifully dismisses all that revenue raising commentary, plays on human challenges around, different bits and pieces, but it's a great use of that optimism bias and all these sorts of things. Anyway, advertising and marketing these specific behaviors is important. So instead of just saying, fatigue kills, don't drive when you're tired. Like what does that mean? But if you say take a break every 3 hours or 2 hours, or specific, that's very easy for people to action. And thinking about, well, how do behavioral change campaigns work and the like? And they're very hard to evaluate. Basic evaluation technique is recall. Do people remember it? It's very hard to understand whether that leads to behavioral change actions. There's some good researchers who can sort of try and get into that. Comedy is very effective for recall with our absolute target, most target audience being young males. We're trying to sort of get this cultural change to happen. So you'll see a lot more. I think in the learning management system, we've put in a series of sort of comical road safety ads, it's a hard thing to do because it's a very, very serious topic, but the New Zealanders do that very well. They've found that art. So I think, Kathy, we can pop a few of those ads in. But then you'll start to see more of these sorts of ads now. We were using some of this knowledge about, not targeting the individual, we're talking about others' mistakes and the like. We're talking about mistake making. We're talking about human tolerance to physical force using things like Graham, who some of you might have seen in life-size sculpture. But this whole initiative that, you'd have to look like Graham to survive on the roads. Graham lives at the Melbourne Museum, but sometimes travels around the country. And it's just getting people to question forces and out there on the road network. Really great initiative for I think it's year 11s in their physics class, and they go through and they look at Graham, and then they redesign the road network so the forces are less, and interactive virtual Graham. He is a physical actual structure, but a virtual version sort of comes back to a normal human as speeds are reduced and raised platforms go in, and barriers and these sorts of things. Enforcement. Enforcement is a supporting part of the system. It really needs to be thought about as a supporting part of the system, because police are often the face of road safety. People think that that's what road safety is, just policing, and it's the police are very upfront in saying, no, we just support this system. It needs to be sort of transformed. But when we're doing enforcement, it does need to be strategic, just due to the cost, and as Phil rightly sort of mentioned there, what's sustainable, the amount of effort involved, and those sorts of things. Specific and general deterrence. So specific deterrence being if you have been fined for a particular thing, you won't do that again. That's the theory. That. General deterrence is that you could be fined for something, and so it changes behavior. You need to have try to target specific and general deterrence, and visual presence really helps with that general deterrence effect. And automation of enforcement, and this can link in with your safe system assessments, is questioning, have we got provision for enforcement techniques in the future, or can we integrate them in early in the project? Point-to-point cameras and the like, or even in terms of enforcement, there's, I suppose, what I would think of was more socially equitable enforcement techniques. Well, so alcohol interlocks are just a really great example here in my mind of, if somebody is a recidivist drink driver, or they have to have this device put in their vehicle where they blow into it, and they have to be 0-0 in order for the car to start, and it'll beep randomly throughout their journey, and they'll have 5 minutes to find somewhere safe to pull over and blow into it again. That was version 2, after we discovered that some people got other people to blow into it so they could get their car home and things like that. Anyway, there's nothing stopping us from a technology perspective having that for speed, like speed interlocks. If there's somebody who's can't stop speeding, well, we can just interlock their car so they can't speed, or we monitor that centrally. There's technology's been there forever. But this, like the alcohol interlocks, good example of where, if you take a very sort of draconian enforcement approach of, crush their car, give them up the fines to, $2,000, take their license off them, you kind of often spiral people's lives further out of control. They can't get to their job, they can't see their kids because their kids live somewhere else, and it's just not a good way to try and operate a society and the like. So if you can just address those areas of risk, you can be in better places. This is my VicRoads car, probably about 15 years ago, maybe even. It was telling me what speed zone I was in, beeping if I went over the speed limit, centrally monitored. You could get all of that data when you got back. The technology, it's been around so long. It's just this sort of reluctance to take that on as a genuine thing. Anyway, in the notes, you'll see some sort of key summary points in a bit of that. I better be a little bit quicker because Kathy wants to show you through the learning management system and show you a little quiz to do. But I'll take any questions as we tick along into the safer vehicles section.
I think we're good, Ken. There's some great commentary coming in about the complete frontal lobe development of males doesn't occur until the mid-20s. So there's not a lot we can do there to change their behaviour because they just can't make good decisions at that age. And yeah.
Great. That's it. And so, yeah, I mean, you're fighting against biology and people. That's just what humans are. Okay. So vehicles present us this dangling allure of solving all of our problems. And it'll be interesting to see sort of when this happens. But I'm predicting the vehicles taking completely over and eliminating road safety issues is a very, very long way away. It's very hard to get any reasonable answers out of the futurists and the people predicting this and people very heavily involved in vehicle safety and autonomy and those sort of things. But it's been interesting to see how it's integrating in. I think ANCAP's been a great example of safety being proven as something the public can get on board with, that it can be a thing that vehicle purchase can influence vehicle purchase. So not just how many cup holders and what color and how fast can it go, but what are its safety features. So I think there's some good stuff there. And I think the integration of safety features that people never see or understand and don't actually interact until they need to, it will continue to accelerate at a pretty good speed. And so we're going to see some great benefit there. But I mean, the limitations are big. So let's take side impact here. Side impact with the pole. I'll give a prize, Kathy. So the ANCAP side impact pole test has recently, about a year or two ago, has recently been increased in speed. And that's the speed that the vehicle comes in and that the dummy in there doesn't get level 3 forces on it, which is pretty much you're going to hold an acquired brain injury for your whole life. But it's very bad. So that's done at a certain speed. It's got to be under that. Guesses at that speed, closest to the speed that this crash happens, to get 5 stars, keeping under that level 3. Any guesses on the speed?
Yeah, we've got a few guesses on the speed. People are suggesting 60, 70, everything down to 30, 20, I think was our lowest. What is it, Ken?
Well, it went up from 29 to 32 kilometers an hour.
And that gives you a 5-star rating, does it?
Yeah. So if vehicles have 5 stars, side impact pole, you can't guarantee that crash happening above 32 kilometers an hour will stop an acquired brain injury. Really bad stuff for the occupant of that vehicle. So that I use that, Kathy, you can work out who gets the prize there. I use that to demonstrate how sort of far we are off vehicles completely absorbing the energy in typical crash types. Side impact, trees, poles, and the like. I mean, we know that happens at very high speeds. I mean, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, and up. And it's just unsurvivable. So there's limitations in there in what the vehicles can do. Some really good advances in thinking about pedestrians and cyclists and motorcyclists as well, where now those are included in ANCAP, and there'll be more of this happening. Your stock standard vehicles these days have bonnets that pop up when a pedestrian is struck, so there's cushioning there, or airbags will come out over it. It's all part of that feature now, so those are good things. When do we get to this vehicle that doesn't actually have a steering wheel and we just get in? Well, you see these putting around the foreshore occasionally, don't they, as autonomous trials and these sorts of things. There's levels of autonomy. I mean, we have autonomy in vehicles already. A lot of newer vehicles out there give you, the driver the illusion of driving. And if there's something the vehicle doesn't like, it will take over. But, we'll see that filtering in. Level 4 vehicles, so there's 5 levels. Well, there's a few sub-levels, but don't worry. Level 4 vehicles look like this, but they're just sort of geo-fenced, or they can only go on certain roads. A level 5 is the fully autonomous. But yeah, we're talking many, many years away, and there will be so much death and serious injury if we just sit on our hands and don't do anything. Then we've got this massive problem of how this all actually gets into play and interfaces with some autonomous, some not autonomous, vulnerable road users. It's fascinating. We do some of the thinking in safe system assessments, and they've left a nice window for us to build more and more thinking into this with roads that cars can read style thinking. But yeah, don't think that the vehicles are just going to solve all the issues. But as I said, I think they're doing some pretty great stuff now. You know, these are vehicles just braking on their own decision when that pedestrian sort of arrives, and you know, sometimes they don't quite get it right, but that's kind of a win. I'm okay, yeah, the dummy lost its leg, but the car did brake and it hit at lower speeds, and speed's so important. And so let's talk briefly about speed. And little reminder of your basics here. We've got, okay, well, let's take a 60 kilometer per hour, a vehicle's traveling at 60 kilometers an hour, and maybe a pedestrian steps out at 45 meters away, and the vehicle will just touch it. So there's some reaction time required, then there's the braking distance. If we go up 10 kilometers per hour, it hits at 46 kilometers, right? Not 10 kilometers. So it is not a linear relationship. Okay, so that's the first important thing. When you then layer that with understanding of the biomechanics of injury and the like, and the research and evidence, and it's basically all based off Cloden research, Craig Cloden over in Center for Automotive Safety Research and the like. But we see for fatal crashes, it's a 4th power relationship. And for serious injuries, we're talking about a 3rd power relationship. So that's saying, you know, small changes in travel speed have significant changes in our most severe crashes, and have still significant, a little less significant in our serious injury. Actually, other injury sort of sits in there at a 2nd power relationship crashes. So if we can get small changes, even small changes in speed, we will see that result in pretty significant reductions in the high-end injuries. Speed and travel speed, and especially speed limits, is so sort of interesting and challenging with communities' thoughts on it. And I talked a little bit about individual risk versus collective risk and how people perceive things. Speed limits, here's some interesting community attitudes to speed limit research. It was done sort of asking, lowering current speed limits would reduce crashes on the roads. And we see sort of half the community saying they don't believe that. Females much smarter there. But there is an absolute wealth of international research that shows that this would absolutely reduce crashes, like no question. And when you ask, well, lowering the current speed limit will reduce the severity of injury when a crash occurs, people tend to have more agreement in that, which is interesting. Maybe the people who don't agree with that maybe don't think that changing speed limits would reduce speed, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, interesting just to sort of note that. But when we've got a lot of work to do with the community on speed, because it is absolutely like rock solid, the research and evidence behind speed limit reductions improving road safety. We do need to operate a transport network, so we can't have the Pacific Highway at 30 kilometers an hour, because it's just sort of not acceptable. But we just do need to understand the benefits we can get. But it's so polarizing, isn't it? I popped this into the Austroads Guide to Road Safety Part 3, which is safe speeds. I was helping out with a little bit of updating of that for a recent one. But it was just showing that, whatever vehicles we have out there and whatever the road environment is out there and whatever the road users are wearing and their bits and pieces, as long as you filter it through an appropriate speed, you can have a safe transport system. It's not, also the other way around. If you have amazingly good vehicles and you have great roads and you have, really good road users, like a racetrack, for example, great vehicles, great roads, great speeds, you can go really fast. And it's very well aligned with the safe system. Anyway, speed limits. So, thinking about infrastructure and/or speed limits as ways to address travel speed is a really good way to do it. Explaining why speed limits are in place can be very helpful in their compliance. Protection of vulnerable road users can be very well accepted, kids being the ultimate there. And targeting speeds at different times and the technologies integrating in well. So we've got our variable speed limits around schools, but you can also integrate that into shopping centres. Actually, to intersections, we're seeing a lot of the rural intersection speed type treatments around Australia and New Zealand, and we've got 10 different names for them now. But the idea being, if there's a vehicle on the side road approaching the intersection, that you slow down the main road. And some key summary points on safe speed. But where we're going to pick up next session is to really now hone in on that infrastructure design. It very much interfaces with speed, but understanding risk. And risk in the international sort of definition of risk is the chance of something happening and then the magnitude of how bad that's going to be. So like the risk of recession is what's the chance we go into recession, and then how deep a recession are we going to be in? That's the risk of recession. It can be health risk, it can be environmental risk, you name it, right? Road safety risk is likelihood times constant. What's the chance of a crash? How bad is it going to be? But we've sort of evolved that a little bit. And it's used in the safe system assessment methodology now that it says how many people are exposed to this risk. Then what's the likelihood of that based on the road environment and the speed and the like? And then how bad is it going to be? And that's what we're really going to be honing in on. And actually in a safe system assessment, quantifying each of those. And to sort of show you a little bit around that, I mean, exposure is thinking about, well, how many people are exposed to this possible crash? And if we block off like a level crossing like this, where there's a mound of dirt, it's hard to see, and there is no exposure to that level crossing crash for vehicles. I mean, you can't get to it. You're not exposed to it. Nobody's exposed to it. Also, if we can completely separate vulnerable road users, for example, they're not exposed to that vehicle to pedestrian or vehicle to cyclist crash type. Okay, there might be a pedestrian to cyclist crash type that there's still exposure to, but not that vehicle one. So that's sort of a couple of examples of exposure. When we think about likelihood, I mean, there's a lot of stuff we've traditionally done in likelihood in road safety. I mean, on a road like this, we've got sealed shoulders, edge lines, audio-tactile edge lines, audio-tactile center lines, wide center lines, good surfaces, lighting. All of these things are trying to stop that crash happen. Reduce the likelihood of crashes happening. Okay. Even things like traffic signals. Okay, they are reducing the likelihood of people crashing. Giving people clear instructions of when they can go and when they can't go and others. And those sort of things. Those are doing nothing for the severity of crashes when they do occur, though. For severity, we have a limited sort of few things we can change, and speed, mass, vulnerability are all critical factors. I mean, this is just basic sort of physics and biomechanics stuff. Yeah, how bad is this going to be when it's going to happen? What is the kinetic energy involved? So if we can slow vehicles at points they're going to crash, right, with raised platforms or the like, that's going to reduce the severity. If we can improve angles of crashes between passenger vehicles, we can push some of the energy into the environment. Or if we can take the energy and dissipate it over time with a barrier system or some sort of cushioning or the like, that is a way for us to lessen the severity of those crashes. So what we're going to do is next time pick up from here, and we're going to run with this. And I'm going to start to get you to think about the infrastructure on the road network and start to categorize it and think about, well, are we changing exposure? Are we changing likelihood? Are we changing severity? Or what could we do to change some of these? Over to you, Kathy.
Thank you, Ken. Now, you covered a lot of ground here. I'm going to take us back. There was a question earlier, and this is around the Melbourne Highway centre barrier. On the deflection side of things, are we saying as long as we can improve existing, that non-conformance can be tolerated?
Yeah, it must be tolerated. I mean, if we can improve road safety and it does not meet standards and guidelines, we have an obligation to do it. Okay, people sometimes say, oh, I can't do that because I would be taking liability to do it. I'm just like, you are liable if you don't do it. And there is evidence to show that this will improve road safety. There's a great, I don't know if they ever published it or released it. Transport for New South Wales got those super expensive lawyers to do a report that showed this. It's like, people, in these jurisdictions, and they go, oh, my engineering registration here says that I'm personally liable if I do something. If safety can be improved, it doesn't mean it's stand or go, and you will be held accountable. People just think it's the other way around. Anyway.
Okay.
Sorry, it's a real frustration of mine.
Yes, it is. Okay, great. So for those of you who haven't jumped into the learning management system, this is what it looks like to you, and you're in the Safe System Assessment November program. So a couple of things I want to point out to you is this resources section and some of the things Ken touched on today. So there is a whole heap of stuff in here. The Austroads guidelines, this section is for Queensland specific. So TMR has some specific templates and so on for safe system assessment. So if you're from Queensland, look at that. What doesn't work for young road users and why? Here's some further information on what Ken covered off in the session today as well. So some nice sheets there for you to read, but obviously feel free to go through as much or as little as you like with the rest of it. Where am I now? Interesting. One moment. However, what you should be looking at is module 1, and to get into module 1 quiz. And this is what you need to do at the end of this session. And that's all for today. And we will see you again at 10 o'clock Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time on Thursday. Are we all good? Any questions? All good. Oh, great. Thumbs up and clapping. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Okay, bye.